Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, Different Beasts. It's a collection of short stories, all from the same author, J.R. McConvey. Most of these have been published in magazines or journals or collections before, but this is the first collection of just his books. This is the first collection of just his stories. This is an interesting book because it opens up with very mundane stories, but then evolves into being very supernatural at times, and then goes back to mundane and then back to supernatural. Several of them are rather plain. One of the first short stories is about a war veteran who is trying to adjust to life and ends up working as I think a concierge or something like that at a hotel in Canada. And there's a film shoot going on for some reason, and a grizzly bear is needed, and the grizzly bear, instead of getting a tame bear, they wanted a wild bear, and so they brought it from Alaska and then sedated it and brought it to this hotel. But of course, the bear does what bears do, and in an unfamiliar situation, it starts going on a rampage. It starts tearing things up, fighting back, and cornering itself in a ballroom at this hotel. And then a visiting American diplomat declares that he's actually got a gun that can kill a bear, and it's just so lucky that I happen to be here. And the narrator, the veteran, comments that he's not even supposed to have the gun, but no one's really willing to stand up to any of the situation, and so they say, look, you're a veteran, can you do this? Just go in with that guy and do that. And the bear ends up being shot. But the bear was just being a bear. A few days earlier, it had been a bear in its native habitat. And now, because it got loose on a film set, it needed to be put down. But the story covers, like, this American diplomat who claims that he can kill the bear, but then is too afraid to do anything. And so the veteran ends up killing the bear and not the American, but the American is the one that is given the credit for it. So there's that kind of story, but then there's also this really weird story where a guy had been a, like, local government elected official, was opposing a important house in the area that apparently had some context that the original owners, had evicted Native Americans, First Nations that lived there. And the narrator is against saving the house and wants to develop over it. And one of the people that was involved in the planning process sees that the community actually wants to keep it, and so he kind of pivots and says, oh, it was all this guy's idea, I was just roped along into it. And so the narrator gets ostracized by his community. Everyone ends up hating him. He ends up already in a divorce. So it's a situation where he really seems like he's going to be gone shortly. But that one ends with an implication that there's, like, a otherworldly entity that is involved with it, and that the main narrator is trying to get rid of it. It's supernatural, but mostly mundane. And there's another short story where a man who had gotten rich in a big city retires early and decides to just retire to a small rural community. And this rural community has this tradition of a big hog on a certain holiday. And the person that normally handles that ends up dying mysteriously, and so he offers to carve this hog. And then there's a bunch of accusations going about back and forth. Oh, well, this guy murdered the hog carver and took over the job. So all sorts of foul accusations floating around in this small town. So the scene opens up. It says, "Good morning, folks. Great deeds require great sacrifice. Before we begin the bidding," he said into the microphone, from which Sister Mary Beth Boltby had retreated to hide in the shadow of the gazebo's roof, covering her nose with her habit, "I would ask that we all take a moment to remember the man who gave his life so that this magnificent specimen you see before you could be cut, cured, and finished under the expert supervision of the finest butcher in the country, and be brought here today to amaze, delight, and edify the good people of Dufferin County, such that this wonderful tradition, a true symbol of this town's solid, earthy heart, could be upheld." And then the bidding starts, and 1,000, 2,000, wait, let's take a moment, 5,000, 10, 12, 25,000, the ham for mayor, the ham is the Antichrist. And so it goes into this bizarre fervor, and instead this whole situation ended with a bizarre footage of the murdered man Ted Kersey's head at the foot of the gazebo, focused almost exclusively on the different acts of violence that the crowd thus began inflicting on one another, the final release of accumulated tension that had been haunting these normally placid and contented folks for the duration of the blighted Easter season. But at the end of it all, there was no trace of the man called Dale Weston, this man who showed up to give this hog as much respect as it deserved. And it wraps up in a very bizarre way, but that ham carving seems almost supernatural in the way it's described. There's that house that's supernatural, but then there's also very mundane. So there's an example of a story where a anti-immigration speaker, American right-wing kind of guy, has a undocumented immigrant as effectively a slave, though he calls her his maid, in his home, but then she ends up poisoning him and getting away so that she can find her family. And that is an interesting mundane twist to 3 or 4 supernatural stories back to back to back. So it does shift from mundane to horror to supernatural to mundane again, and each of these is about a monster. Really, that's what it is. In the case of the grizzly, it's partially the American and partially the grizzly that are the monsters. In the case of the house, it's this history and this potential that there's something supernatural there that is the monster. In the case of Dale Weston and this hog, it's the whole fervor that is a monstrous entity to itself. There's this rich man who is effectively using his position to shout against immigration, who is then enslaving one of his own, that is a monster. And so all of these beasts are varied, but they're interesting. And that's what I liked about this book. I read this over the course of a couple days, and it's really a page turner. Once you're reading, it's really hard to put it down. There's a bizarre story in here about a demon that effectively inhabits a stuffed animal, but that the daughter of that narrator needs that stuffed animal to comfortably sleep, and so he kind of just has to accept that there's this demon in this stuffed animal. It's, very strange stories that you find in here. And that's, I think I've mentioned 3 or 4, maybe 5. I think I've mentioned 5 or 6 different stories, and this book has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 stories in this, and I go over the basics of the story, but not the details. And I don't think I've really spoiled anything, but the short stories are fascinating. There's 12 of them, and I think I've covered about half of them in this. There's a lot more in here to be read. It's only about 200 pages long, but it's a fun 200 pages. Now, I paid in the ballpark of $15 for this. I don't know where I bought this from. I know it wasn't Coaz. I know it wasn't anywhere in El Paso. So I don't remember where I bought this, but I do know that the sticker does say $15, and it was worth that $15, I think. I don't think I'd necessarily reread this. It's not signed. I may put it back into the used book system because I'm not going to reread it, I don't think, and it's not signed. I try to keep all the signed books I have, regardless of whether I'm interested in them or not. So I think this will go back into the system. I don't know where, but hopefully someone else can experience this book and enjoy it just like I did. And if any of the short stories I discussed seem like something you want to really read for yourself, I would recommend checking out this book, Different Beasts, looking for it online, at a used bookstore, at a library. Check it out, enjoy the short stories, and then pass it on to someone else, I think. So yeah, that's Different Beasts. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.